Chapter 9 is where we are at, and this is an exciting passage of Scripture. I think this thing, just what's going on here is exciting. We've got, there's so much in it. We're going to book our way through it, and there are some neat truths that we need to learn about God and about well, as the title is, you can put the title slide up, the key to moving the darkness. One of the things about Mark chapter 9 is, and Josh was kind of alluding to it as well, was we like mountaintop experiences, right? We like it when things are at their best. Money's doing okay, and family's doing okay. We're living for God. We're seeing things happen at church. Maybe you could even compare, a revival meeting to maybe a mountaintop experience where tonight we're just really getting to enjoy the Lord and His presence here. And we like mountaintop experiences. In Mark chapter 9, we have a literal mountaintop experience because beginning of the chapter, Jesus is transfigured in front of his disciples. By the way, if you've ever heard of the transfiguration of Jesus, just so that you know, I didn't realize this until I was reading through it. The word transfigured means metamorphosis, which means this. When Jesus was transfigured, it was not just Jesus with a glow around his face, okay? The word transfigured means to change form. Now, I don't know what Jesus looked like on that mountain, but I can tell you this. Whatever he looked like what he's going to look like when he comes in his kingdom. That, by the way, because Peter gets in trouble for a lot of things he said. That's, by the way, why Peter said, let's build 3 tents, because Zechariah prophesies that when the kingdom comes, we're going to celebrate with the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Tents. And so he thought, boom, kingdom's here. Let's build the tabernacles right away. And so he was excited, but, it wasn't time for it yet. But it was a neat thing that they got to see. But one of the things that Jesus did was he didn't linger there on the mountain. After this was over, he and his 3 disciples came back down the mountain. And the reason why they came down is the same reason God doesn't always let us dwell on mountaintops, is because he wants us to come down to reality and interact with human needs. Because they're all around us. People who are in need, people who have been lied to by the devil, people who have been deceived by our adversary, and God wants us to come down, interact with human needs, and combat the darkness of our enemy. And so tonight we're going to look at the key to moving the darkness. So let's look at, if we could first, at the situation. Now we're looking at a story that took place in Jesus' life. So let's see first the situation of what was going on here in the passage. Mark chapter 9, verse number 14 says, when he came to his disciples, so he comes down the mountain to the other 9 of his disciples, and it says he saw a great multitude about them, and the scribes, that's the religious leaders, think Pharisees from Sunday night, and he said the scribes were questioning with them. Now, don't let the word questioning throw you. It sounds like, the scribes are like, disciple, would you please answer my question? No, the word question means to debate. There was a heated debate going on down below. Scribes and disciples. Why? Well, first of all, it says, verse 15, straightway, all the people, when they beheld him, saw Jesus, they were greatly amazed, and running to him, saluted him. In other words, the people were excited because the debate was about to get good, because Jesus had shown up, and Jesus knew how to school the scribes and Pharisees. People loved watching their religious leaders get schooled and go, and the people of God, they love going, wow. Well, that's kind of, wow. I guess our Pharisees don't know everything, do they? And so here comes Jesus. Verse 16 says, Jesus asked the scribes, what question ye with them? So what's the whole debate about? Well, there was a man, a dad that we're about to find out, who cared nothing for this debate, and he pushed through the crowd. He and his son were the cause of the debate, but he cared nothing for the debate. He wanted to get to Jesus. Verse 17 says, and one of the multitude answered and said, this is the dad that is there, he says, Master, I have brought unto thee my son. So he says, I brought my kid to you, Jesus. Why? Because he hath a dumb spirit. Now, as we're about to see in these upcoming verses, the idea there where he says, my son has a dumb spirit, it means my son has been possessed by a demon. And look at what this demon was doing to this boy. Verse 17 says, that he was dumb, which is just an old English word for mute, which means this demon made it so that his son could not speak. Verse 25 tells us that the boy was also deaf. Verse 18, he says that wheresoever this demon takes my son, he teareth him. That means has the idea of throwing him down. He says in verse number 18 that he'll take him. That means to overtake him. He'll throw him down. Verse number 20 says that he'll make him convulse and wallow and foam. Verse 18 says that he would then become stiff. He pineth away. That means he becomes stiff. Luke chapter 9 tells us about this same story. Tells us that he was given to sudden screams, that this demon would just crush him, and it was an awful situation. This demon had possessed this boy. It was a bad situation. Now, what had happened? It says in verse 18, so he foameth, he gnashes with his teeth, he pineth away. Okay, well, you think, you got him to the right place. Well, look at verse 18. The dad says, I spake to thy disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. Now, I read that, and I think, well, if it was me, being a disciple of Jesus there, and someone, well, just think about you. If someone came up to you and brought their kid who was, brought a child with them who was thrashing around, clearly controlled by a demon, would be thrown down on the ground, would begin to thrash around and then become stiff as a board, wallowing, foaming at the mouth, and someone said to you, listen, I know you know Jesus. Would you mind casting this demon out of him? You might say, oh, well, let me call my pastor. You probably toss the ball over there because he knows what to do in every situation, right? And so we might look at the disciples and say, well, maybe we should go easy on them because, okay, if I was in that situation, I may not know what to do. Here's the problem, folks. Look, if you got quick fingers, look at Mark chapter 6. In Mark chapter 6, the Bible tells us that when Jesus commissioned his disciples, Mark chapter 6, verse number 7, it says, when he called unto him the 12 and began to send them forth 2 by 2, it says, what? He gave them power over what? Unclean spirits. That means Jesus had given his disciples authority and power to cast out demons. So, in other words, this dad was absolutely right to bring this boy to the disciples, because they have been authorized to cast out demons. You say, well, I don't know, did they cast them out? Maybe just like 1 or 2. Look at Mark 6, verse 13. It says, and they cast out many devils. So the disciples, it was not a strange thing that this dad brought his boy who was possessed by a demon to the disciples and said, please cast out the demon. There was nothing wrong or unusual about that. Why? Because the disciples had been authorized by God to cast out demons. And they had done it before. They should have been able to do it again. There was a problem, though. They couldn't. Whoa. All of a sudden, they used to be able to do it, and they can't. By the way, this is kind of where we're going on this. Let me just say this. Here's Jesus. He's up on the mount. He's got 3 disciples with him. 9 are left down here at the bottom. And a man brings a boy who's been possessed by a demon, who's being attacked by Satan himself, and the disciples are not able to help this boy. Can I say something, friends? You and I, Jesus is no longer physically walking here on this earth. He's ascended back into heaven, is at the right hand of the throne of God. But you know who he has left here? You. You, Christian, and me. You and me is here. Jesus is not. Can I ask you a question? When, we know people who have been, now maybe not necessarily demon-possessed, but we sure know people who have been lied to and been deceived by our adversary, the devil. They can't walk there and they think, oh my goodness, my friend has so many needs. He's listened to the lies of the devil. He's listened to the deception of the devil. The evil things have just befallen him. He needs help. They can't walk him up to Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is in heaven. But you know what the next best thing they've got is? Us. People are going to come to you looking for help, spiritual help. And on the day that they do, are you going to fail too? Are you going to say, well, I don't know, I don't have nothing to give you? Or are you going to try to give him some kind of help and advice and have nothing work? What in the world happened? Why was it that they, at one point, they could cast out demons, but now they no longer could? What was the problem? All right, so here it is. Now you've seen the situation. Let's look at the problem. What was the problem of why they could no longer help someone who was under the oppression of the devil? In verse number 19, Jesus answered him, and not just the dad, but as we see in the verse, he's also really addressing the disciples here. Jesus answered and said, "O faithless generation." You want to know why the disciples could no longer help someone who was under the power of the devil? It was because Jesus says they were, quote, faithless. There's the problem. Now, if you're like me, I read that and I thought, okay, what does that look like in normal life? What's behind that word faithless? What in the world does that mean? All right, let me help you with this, okay? So the word faith, when you go through your Bible, as you go through your English Bible, of course, in the New Testament, you're going to see the word faith all over the place. You're going to also see the word belief, believe, believing, believeth, and you'll see that over and over and over. So those two words, as far as it might be every time, but at least most of the time, those two words come from one single Greek word. The word faith and the word belief come from one single Greek word, and it's just the Greek word pistos. You know, for the verb form it's pisteuo, but it's all coming from one word, pistos, okay? So, you know what this word is? You ready for this? When Jesus says, here's your problem, disciples, here's why all of a sudden you had no more power to help someone who is under the oppression of the evil one, it's because, and it's the word pistos for faith, and it's the word for faith or belief. Oh, by the way, let me tell you this. The Greek word pistos, which is translated in your English Bible as faith or belief, believing, believeth, it's a Greek word that means, ready for this? To trust or to depend. Whenever you see the word faith or believe, it's the idea of the word to trust or to depend. That's why I love it when, like John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever what? Believeth in him. You know, I like it. I heard someone say trust in him. Because do not people say, oh, I believe in God, and immediately you're like, well, I guess that's what the verse says. Well, but wait, and you want to, the reason why all of a sudden there's that confusion is because the word believe, when you see it in your New Testament, it's a word that means to trust or to depend. And that's why John 3:16 is so great, because it says that whosoever will trust, will put their dependence on Christ alone, will not perish, but will have everlasting life. You know, and how much dependence they had to put on God? They had to put all of it on them. How about this verse? Ephesians 2:8 says, for by grace you are saved through, good, yeah, I heard trust and I heard faith. Both, it's the same thing. And because what are you saved by? Are you saved by your works? Well, no. Ephesians 2:8 says, by grace you are saved through faith, trust, dependence, and that not of yourselves is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. When you got saved, you put your faith, you put your belief, you put your dependence on Jesus Christ alone to save you from your sins. Now, if you had put dependence on mostly Jesus and a little bit of yourself, are you saved? No. If you're coming to God and saying, well, I'm depending on you almost all the way, that I'm depending on you most of the way to save me from my sins, but I have to do a little bit too. Okay, then you're not saved, because Christ says that salvation is by grace through faith, through dependence alone. That's the word pistos, okay? So this word, when Jesus tells his disciples, he says, you want to know why you no longer had the power to help people who are under the oppression of the evil one? You know what your problem is? It's the word pistos with an A in front of it, or Greek would be an alpha. You say, well, is that supposed to help me? Okay. Do you remember in school, probably elementary, maybe junior high, remember vocab class? Did anyone have to take vocab class? Remember that? I mean, vocab class was one of those classes that's like, what are we doing? And why? Remember prefixes and suffixes. Is that bringing back bad memories? And you're like, you have to learn all these prefixes and suffixes and the definitions of them, and there's some of them are supposed to be different, but they're basically the same, and it's, I don't know. Okay, well, guess what? If you struggled with vocab class, tonight's the night that you're going to actually find out it actually helped you one day in your life, okay? Because what's happened here is you have the word pistos, but they put a prefix in front of it, and it's just the letter A. So now you have basically a pistos, pistos. Now let me compare it to this. Do you know what a theist is? What is a theist? Theos. It's from the Greek and Latin. Thea means God. It's someone who believes in God. Do you believe in God? Who believes in God out here? Who believes that God exists? Okay. That would make you a theist. Put an A in front of theist, though. What do you have? Atheist. What is an atheist? Someone who does not believe that there is a God. All right. Here's another word. Take the word typical. We use the word typical all the time. We might say, that's a typical organ. That's a typical piano. These are typical chandeliers. That's, this is a typical church. That's a typical pew, whatever. But if you take an A and put it in front of it, what word do you have? Atypical, whichever way it's pronounced, atypical, atypical, and now all of a sudden we'd be saying, oh my goodness, that's strange, that's atypical, that's atypical, that's not normal. When you put an A in front of it, it makes the word the complete opposite of what it would normally mean. Okay, so here's what we have. Jesus says, you want to know why? You no longer were able to help anybody, people who are under the oppression of our adversary. You know why you couldn't help them? It was pistos. You're no longer depending. Back in Mark chapter 6, when Jesus says to these disciples, okay, you're going to go out 2 by 2, and you're going to cast out demons, and you're going to raise the dead, and you're going to heal diseases, and you're going to preach. I bet these little fishermen were going, we're going to do what now? We're going to be what? Oh, and we're just the two of us? You're not coming? You're doing the demon thing. I don't know, man. You might get kind of nervous and that. But what happens is when they go out, and, they're kind of, 2 by 2, these disciples are going out, and oh my goodness, here's the people we're supposed to preach to. Here's the demon-possessed guy we're supposed to cast out. You know what they were doing? They were probably saying something like this. Oh my goodness. I can't do this. Can you do? No, I can't. Boy, we better be trusting God. God, you've got to deliver. You know what happened all throughout their ministry in that early part of the Gospels? They saw God do all kinds of work. Why? Because the disciples were depending on God to give them power. They needed God's power. They needed His strength. They needed Him so bad. They realized, I cannot help anyone if I don't have God's power. Something happened, though. At some point, they started saying, we got this. This is just sanctified imagination, but I wonder if when those 9 disciples are gathered down here and a father brings his, demon-possessed boy up to him, I wonder if some of the disciples looked at each other and said, hey, remember when we cast out demons in Capernaum? Yeah, remember when we did that? That was pretty cool. Hey, let's go cast this one out. Come on, we got this. Can you hear them saying that? Why? Why? Because Jesus says, you want to know why all of a sudden you were a failure? Because you stopped depending upon me. The problem? Why all of a sudden was someone no longer able to help someone else who was under the oppression of our adversary? The problem was because of self-dependence. They thought they had it within them. They thought the power and the strength came out of them and that they could make this thing happen. Well, God was about to show them that that is not how this happens. But rather, Jesus said, oh, faithless generation, He says, how long shall I be with you? Actually, Jesus was just a year away from going to the cross. And now here they are in a time of testing, and they failed. And He says, how long shall I suffer you? Which means, how long do I have to put up with you? He says, bring him to me. And in verse 20, it says, they brought this boy to Jesus. When he saw him, that's talking about the demon, saw Jesus, straightway the spirit tore him. The spirit tore the boy, and he fell to the ground and wallowed foaming. And Jesus, asked his father, how long is it ago since this came unto him? And he said, well, of a child. Now, one thing to note here is, you ever wondered, here comes demon-possessed boy. And as soon as the demon-possessed boy sees Jesus, all of a sudden, the demon starts thrashing and throwing the boy around. You ever wondered, why didn't Jesus just go, be thou healed? Why did He go, how long has he been this way? You ever thought about that? Like if you were with your mom or your dad and all of a sudden they started to have a heart attack, started to have a stroke, you call 911, the paramedics come in and the paramedic comes in and goes, whoa, wow. He puts his bag down and says, is that your mom, huh? Yeah, goodness. Yeah, this is rough. This is rough. Yeah, she's pretty rough. She had bad heart. Yeah, I thought so. How long has she been that way? Yeah, no, I could see. Yeah, it's definitely probably a heart attack. No, I mean I could check, but I would think you would say, "What are you doing? Do something for her." You'd say, "Please deliver her from this problem. You're the only answer I have." And this dad may have gotten frustrated at Jesus in this, but here's what Jesus was doing. Jesus was not being cruel to this dad. Rather, what he was going to do was Jesus was checking to see, Dad, those disciples would not depend upon me to cast out this demon. Will you, even if the situation looks even worse now? Because all that God needed, could we say, really was, the problem was self-dependence. So all Jesus was looking for in order to heal was he was looking for dependence. He was looking for someone to depend. And so verse number 22, the dad said, oftentimes it hath cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. He says, but if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And what did Jesus say in verse 23? He said, if thou canst believe. Whoa, 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 whoa. There's the word believe. What does the word believe mean? What does it mean? Trust or depend. So he says, if you will trust or depend, he says what? All things are possible to him that believeth. So the problem was self-dependence. What's the solution? Dependence. Well, that's not deep. And why don't we do it? I think it's interesting. This verse is one that maybe it's made you nervous before. Like, oh my goodness. Jesus literally said, if we believe. And the world has ruined the English word believe. They just have this, there's all over, especially family-friendly movies. Christmas is coming, so it's going to be all over your Hallmarky movies that you're going to be watching. And, they're going to be talking about, oh, you just got to believe down in your heart. And nobody in Hallmark has any clue what that word means, but they use it over and over. And so we get this confused idea of what believe means. And so then there's other, really false teachers who take this word believe and say, well, if you just believe hard enough, God will do anything that you ask him to do. And that's the wrong application of this as well. By the way, one of the things we see we don't have time to look at it, in the book of Mark is one of the things Jesus does qualify this idea of all things, is all things that are within God's will. But also we got to remember this. Jesus is not saying, when he says all things, remember, he's in the context here of helping people who are under the oppression of our adversary. He's not saying if you just depend hard enough, man, you can get a car, you can get whatever. You just depend, you can have whatever you want. You just name it and claim it. That is not what Jesus is saying here. What he's saying here is this. He's saying, listen, if you will depend upon me and trust me that I can deliver your son from this demon that has taken a hold of him, Jesus is in essence saying this: there is no limit to what I could do. There's no limit. You know why? Because God always honors God dependence. God always honors God dependence. And when it comes to people who you are, around, and you say, boy, I want to have an influence on people. I want to make a difference in people's lives. People are deceived by our adversary. They are rolling in sin. They don't know how to be saved. I want to be used by God. I want God to use me. Folks, we need to depend on God. Usually we depend more on the apologetics videos that we watched on YouTube. When God says, no, you need to ask for my power. You need my strength. Because can I say this? There is no limit. There is no limit to what God could do with a God-dependent you. There's no limit. If you would actually be God-dependent, you could be the one that God uses to start revival through your prayer life. There's no limit to what God could do. God could use a God-dependent you to start a missions movement in another nation. You say, oh, that's a cute application, Brother Matt. You say, I'm 62 and I'm getting near retirement. There's your lack of dependence. You say, well, I don't know if God's called me to do that. Okay, that's a different question. But when you just say, well, I'm 62, getting near retirement, so, I don't think God would do that with me anyway. You never know what God could do with a God-dependent you. Because the missionaries are coming off the field faster than they're getting on. And it won't take long before we are shorter than we already are in the mission field. Why couldn't God use you? You know why God couldn't use you? Because you're self-dependent. That's the only thing that'll keep you. That is literally the only thing that will keep God from using you on the mission field. Is if you're going to be self-dependent. Well, I don't see how that could work out. You're right. That's self-dependence. You ask God, if God's called you, you depend on him, and God's going to plow the way out so that you can get through. You never know what God could do with a God-dependent you. There's a study of American evangelical pastors, just gospel-preaching pastors. The average age right now in America is 55, which means this: in 15 years, basically most Bible-preaching churches in America are going to be out of pastors. Oh, that's a situation. Well, why couldn't God use you? Well, not me. Yeah, I just don't have it. Yeah, you don't have it because you're self-dependent right now. You're talking about you. You know, God could use you. Me? Yeah, God could use you. Why? Because you're no different than someone else. God could use you. Listen, let's be even more simple. God could use you to bring, a dozen people from your workplace into this church and see some of them get saved. If you would start, instead of just going to work and being like, oh my goodness, I have to hang out with all these jerks again. Instead of doing that, say, God, would you give me power? Would you give me strength? Would you give me help so that I can be the witness and the testimony I need to be, so that when the time comes, I can give these people the gospel? Folks, God could do anything with a God-dependent you. He could use your love and your counsel to bring a sin-oppressed Christian back into walking with God. God could use you. God could use a tragedy in your life I've seen it before, to make thousands of people seek God. If you were God-dependent and you stopped trusting in your own strength, because we are so geared towards trusting in the power of our own strength. We say, well, I don't know. I don't see how God could ever do something like that. Well, that's when we have to say, listen, if God's called me, if God wants me to do it, I'm going to trust him that he can bring me through it. In other words, there are so many people out there who need to be reached. People are in your workplace. People are in your neighborhood. People are just out there in other places. And folks, they are deceived by the adversary. They think that works will get them to heaven. They believe that there is no God. And Jesus is no longer here on this earth, but there's us. And God has left us. He said, you are the light. In other words, he said there's not option number 2. We don't have a backup plan. You are the light of the world. And he says, and if you will go out in dependence upon me, God says there is no limit to what I could do with you. There's no limit. So what does it say in verse number 24? I like this. It says in verse 24, straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help thou mine unbelief. Lord, I believe. Trust, depend. I'm trusting and depending. But he says, help thou my lack of dependence. In other words, he says, God, I am putting my trust on you right now, and I am being hit from behind right now with the desire to stop depending upon you. Lord, help. You look at a guy like that and he says, I'm depending, but I'm about to fall back into undependence. You look at someone like that who's really, is depending, and he's kind of pulled back and he feels like he's being pulled back. You look at a guy like that and you think, so is he depending or isn't he? Well, he is. You say, Matt, how do you know? Because in the next verses, Jesus is going to heal his son. And you know what we might call it is shaky faith. Some people have what you might call resting faith. Others have a shaky faith where it's like, God, I've never seen you do this before, but I'm depending upon you to do it. I was, one of the things I get to do a lot of, and we need to close here in just a minute, but one of the things I get to do a lot during the summers, I get to preach in Bible camps all over the United States. And there's one I preach at in Western Virginia, and it's called Rapidan Baptist Camp. This camp has something has something pretty neat there. Different camps have different things, different features that are really neat. This camp has a 65-foot tower that you can climb up, and there is a zip line that goes off of it, and you can ride that thing down. How many of you like zip lines? Who likes zip lines? Stuff like that? Okay, all right, cool. How many of you say, I'm scared of heights, you ain't getting me up there for nothing? Anyone scared of heights? Yeah, okay. All right, yeah, sure, that's fine. So I enjoy, I'm not, I don't know. I like those kinds of things, and so I'm preaching this junior camp, okay? Think 3rd through 6th graders. There are a whole bunch, 100 of them are there at this camp. I'm the preacher. So one of the cool things about being a preacher is I get to do not anything I want to do, but almost anything I want to do. I get to go anywhere. I can be a part of the activities and all that. So me, why would I not go down the 65-foot zip line, right? Right. So I go to the zip line, and I get in line, get in my harness, and there's kids in line, and I'm standing there, and I'm thinking, and people, this line was taking forever. It's taking forever. I mean, we're finally moving a little bit forward, and then you're just waiting, and it's like, and I know people up there, it doesn't take that long to hook. They can have you out in just in 30 to 60 seconds. And it's just like, this is taking forever. I mean, Noah's going to be ready to get off the boat 40 days and 40 nights before we're done on this thing. What is going on? And so finally we're moving farther up. And when I got to the top, I found out what was happening. So these 3rd through 6th graders are coming to the top. They're all harnessed up, and they get all hooked up. The guy's up there, ching, ching, ching. He calls down whatever, checks down there, check. Then he opens the gate and says, go ahead. And the kids go, and they're standing there forever, and they won't move. And so, and the guy's trying to convince them, okay, you can go. You can go. Go ahead and step off. Yeah, come on, just go ahead and step off. Yeah, just kind of, yeah, sure, sit on the edge, kind of slide. No, okay, so go ahead and stand up, yeah. And now why don't you jump off? Why don't you step? You got to go sometime, man. This was happening with almost every kid. And there were some there was one, I remember the guy once saying, okay, you know what we'll do is we'll shut the gate, and I want you to look right up at me. Look at me. And he started slapping him. The kid was about to pass out. He was so scared. And so he's, so he's there. Oh boy, hang on. And so this is all happening up on this thing. This is why it's taking so long. And I said to the guy running it, I'm like, man, can't you just push them off? And they're already hooked up. And he said, no, technically, if I pushed them off, we get in big trouble, have to pay a fine and all that. I'm like, I'm not staff. Can I push them off? Hurry this thing up. And so finally, this kid in front of me, he did the whole thing. He's coming up, he's like stepping off like this and like coming back up, and he's just doing this over and over. Finally, he steps off. And he's all hooked up. And folks, you know what happened when he stepped off that thing? As he stepped off, he's hooked into this harness. He came down, the harness caught him, and as he came down, he sat into that harness, rode all the way down to the bottom. You know what comes up next? Me. I come up next, and so I get hooked up. I said, whoa, that is a long way down. That's cool. Get me hooked up, and hooked up. Ready? Okay. And me, I jump off. I do a running jump because that's the best way to do a zip line. It's a running jump. All this no. You got to run and jump, and it's way more fun if you do that. And so I jump off. The same thing happens. Harness catches me, ride all the way down. Here's the question, folks, and the analogy. That boy and me, we both accomplished the same thing. We both got down to the bottom. Right? And we were both alive, right? Both alive, same thing. So you know what we had to do? Both of us had to make a choice. Are we going to depend on the harness to bring us down? I did faster. Why? Well, I'd seen the harness work before. I'd done this when I was a teenager. I knew this harness would work. This kid had never seen the harness work before. And so it was his first time having to put his dependence upon that harness to basically save his life. But you know what? It was a very shaky dependence. But finally, you know how I know he finally depended on the harness? He stepped off. And same thing with me. Mine was, you might call resting faith. His was more of a shaky faith. But it was both dependence. Both of them were dependents. And we accomplished the exact same thing. Can I tell you something, friend? You might say, I've never seen God use me to witness before. I just don't really tell many people about Jesus. I just, these are some serious issues some of my friends have. And I want to meet their needs, but I'm just not sure if I can. And can I tell you something? There is no limit to what God could do with a God-dependent you. And this, just to close in summary, Jesus then heals this boy, heals this kid. And at the end of the chapter, he pulls in his disciples into a house, and the disciples asked, what was up with that? Why couldn't we cast him out? And it's really interesting. Jesus, you would think he would say, well, you didn't depend upon me. But he says a different word. In verse number 29, he says, the reason why you were not able to cast him out is this kind cometh forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. Here's how I call it. The vehicle is prayer. So we're supposed to, the solution to helping people is God dependence. How do we make that happen? Well, you know the God-dependent people because they pray and say, God, I need your power. You know the self-dependent people? They say, I got this. I watched a video. I got this. I read a book. I know the answers. I don't care what atheist comes up to me. I got an answer for everything he's got. That's the guy, that's the lady who will never see God move. But the person who is out of answers but knows this, God can enable me. That's the person that God uses. Let's move the darkness. We've got some people who are bound by the darkness of our adversary. How can the darkness be moved? Well, if we'll start depending upon God. You know what needs to happen in this invitation is I would say there's probably plenty of us in this room that you need to go to your knees tonight. For one thing, ask God's forgiveness for all your self-dependence. And then you need to maybe name someone and say, God, give me power to reach this person. This person is so in need. Give me your power. And look out, because there's no limit to what God might do with a God-dependent you. So let's bow our heads. Let's bow our heads. How many of you would say, with a raised hand, you would say,